يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم أنت الرب الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر عظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور، وهو الشهر الذي فرضت صيامه عليه، وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان، وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من ألف شهر. فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليه، من علي بفقاك رقبتي من النار في من تمن عليه، وأدخلني الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام، صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عام هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا الله.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. 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 بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك، وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، واجب يا رحيم دعوتي، واقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده الذي لا تنقص خزائن ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما. إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجة بي إليه عظيما، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي أتبعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك، فإن أبت عني اعتدت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبت عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عن، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك، فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين، رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق للخلق، باسط الرزق، فالق الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى، وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادل، ولا شبيه يشاكل، ولا ظهير يعاضد، قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازي، فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مونقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يمتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين، وينجي الصالحين، ويرفع المستضعفين، ويضع المستكبرين، ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاصم الجبارين، مبير الظالمين، مدرك الهاربين، نكال الظالمين، صريخ المستصرخين، موضي حاجات الطالبين، معتمد المعمدين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها، وترجف الأرض وعمارها، وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق، ويرزق ولا يرزق، ويطعم ولا يطعم، ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى، وهو حي لا يموت، بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك، وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك، أفضلا وأحسنا وأجملا وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيبا وأطهرا وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على صديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي، حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر، وحفه بملائكتك المقربين، وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اجعل الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله، مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له، أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهلها، وتذل بها النفاق وأهلها، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المم به شعثنا، واشعب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واغض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق. آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وغيبة إمامنا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآل محمد، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح تعجل، وبضر تكشف، ونصر تعز، وسلطان حق تظهر، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم برحمتك في الصالحين فأدخلنا، وفي عليين فارفعنا، وبكأس من معين من عين سلسبيل فاسقنا، ومن الحور العين برحمتك فزوجنا، ومن الولدان المخلدين كأنهم لؤلؤ مكنون فأخذنا، ومن ثمار الجنة ولحوم الطير فأطعمنا، ومن ثياب السندس والحرير والاستبرق فألبسنا، وليلة القدر، وحج بيتك الحرام، وقتلا في سبيلك فوفق لنا، وصالح الدعاء والمسألة فاستجب لنا، وإذا جمعت الأولين والآخرين يوم القيامة فارحمنا، وبراءة من النار فاكتب لنا، وفي جهنم فلا تغلنا، وفي عذابك وهوانك فلا تبتلنا، ومن الزقوم والضريع فلا تطعمنا، ومع الشياطين فلا تجعلنا، وفي النار على وجوهنا فلا تكببنا، ومن ثياب النار وسرابيل القطران فلا تلبسنا، ومن كل سوء يا لا إله إلا أنت، بحق لا إله إلا أنت فنجنا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل، أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم، المشكور سعيهم، المغفور ذنوبهم، المكفر عن سيئاتهم، وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية، وتوسع في رزقي، وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به لدينك، ولا تستبدل بي غيري. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان، أو يطلع الفجر من ليلة هذه ولكتب لي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا ذا الذي كان قبل كل شيء ثم خلق كل شيء ثم يبقى ويفنى كل شيء، يا ذا الذي ليس كمثله شيء، ويا ذا الذي ليس في السماوات العلى ولا في الأرضين السفلى ولا فوقهن ولا تحتهن ولا بينهن إله يعبد غيره، لك الحمد حمدا لا يقوى على إحصائه إلا أنت. فصل على محمد وآل محمد صلاة لا يقوى على إحصائها إلا أنت. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إلهي وقف السائلون ببابك، ولاظ الفقراء بجنابك، ووقفت سفينة المساكين على ساحل بحر جودك وكرمك، يرجون الجواز إلى ساحة رحمتك. إلهي إن كنت لا تغفر في هذا الشهر الشريف إلا لمن أخلص لك في صيامه وقيامه، فمن للمذنب المقصر إذا غرق في بحر ذنوبه وآثامه. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم إلا المطيعين فمن للعاصين، وإن كنت لا تقبل إلا من العاملين فمن للمقصرين. إلهي ربح الصائمون وفاز القائمون ونجي المخلصون، ونحن عبيدك المذنبون، فارحمنا برحمتك واتقنا من النار بعفوك يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور، اللهم أغني كل فقير، اللهم أشبع كل جائع، اللهم اكسو كل عريان، اللهم اقضي دين كل مدين، اللهم فرج عن كل مكروه، اللهم رد كل غريب، اللهم فك كل عسير، اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين، اللهم اشف كل مريض، اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك، اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك، اللهم اقض عنا ديني واغننا من الفقر إنك على كل شيء قدير.
سورة مباركة الفاتحة.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك وتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله، يا إمام الرحمة، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله، يا أبا القاسم يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين، يا علي بن أبي طالب، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد، يا قرة عين رسوله، يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله، اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي، أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي، أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله، اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين، يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وصي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله، وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا، يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله، يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. حاجات. يا سادتي يا موالي، إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله، وتوسلت بكم إلى الله، واستشفعت بكم إلى الله، فاشفعوا لي عند الله، واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله، فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله، وبحبكم وبقربكم وأرجو نجاة من الله، فكونوا عند الله رجائي. يا سادتي يا أولياء الله، صلى الله عليهم أجمعين، ولعن الله أعداء الله الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين، آمين رب العالمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلوات.
أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وابناءه المعصومين بالحق حجج الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير الأمل. حي على خير الأمل. قد قامت الصلاة. قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر.
repeat after me.
صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردنا الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالأرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشاء نغرقهم فلا شريك لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم أزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسكناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند مهترون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون.
Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun. Earlier this morning, there was a twin bombing in a predominantly Shia boys' school in Kabul, Afghanistan. About 25 young boys got martyred in the bombing. They were just leaving the school to go back home, and this took place. It is reported that one father lost 3 sons in this bombing. It's a very sad situation. Let us all please pray for all the innocent lives that have been taken unjustly with this bombing, and we should pray to the Almighty that He should relieve the earth of all the oppression by the quick reappearance of Imam Sahibu Zaman alayhi salam. Let us recite Surah Fatiha for all those innocent young departed souls. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Let us all please recite Amayujibu for the safety and victory of all our brothers and sisters around the world, for the safety of our holy shrines, for the quick reappearance of Imam Sahibu Zaman alayhi salam, from safety of coronavirus for all humanity, and for shafa of all maris, especially those who have been injured in this bombing in Afghanistan this morning. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. 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 Allahumma salli ala.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Allentown or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: who was Abu Dhar? We began a conversation last night on the companions of the Prophet, and we motivated that conversation. We began that discussion saying that there are certain individuals who we need as role models, who we can aspire to, and people who may be more like you and I, people who may be, for example, fallible in the sense that they can make mistakes. You will find, especially in these conversations that we'll begin to have, especially beginning tonight and then subsequent nights, that many of these companions that we discuss, they felt and had emotions like you and I. Not to say the infallibles and the ma'sumin didn't, but the ma'sumin, as high as their emotion was, they also had control over their emotions. But you will find some of them were very honest, for example. Some of these companions, at times, for example, they suffered from anger issues. You will find that in a few nights coming up as well. You will find that some of them, like us, they experienced emotions. And so for us to understand their lives can give us a window into our own lives and understanding how can we elevate ourselves spiritually. And we motivated this conversation by saying, look, we have to know this because number one, these are people who can help us get to a higher realm spiritually, but also we need to be able to respond to those who may come forward and say to us as followers of the Ahlul Bayt that we do not, for example, respect the Sahaba or the companions of Rasulullah. And we said that we have the utmost respect for the companions of Rasulullah. Now, moving this conversation along, our discussion tonight will be around the personality known as Abu Dhar or Abu Dhar, a great companion of Rasulullah. But one thing that needs to be set out on the first level is understanding at the first level the relationship and the connection between Salman and Abu Dhar. That is, Salman, who we discussed last night, and Abu Dhar, who we'll discuss tonight. What's the connection between these two personalities and what can we learn from it? Number one. Number two, when we come to Abu Dhar, what was his story? That is, how did he come to Islam? Where was he from? What was his family background? What was his tribal background? And what can we learn from that in our lives as well? And how did he seek out truth? Number three, what was his journey of truth? How did he get to the truth ultimately? Number four, what was his participation in certain expeditions with the Holy Prophet and in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet? Number five, and very importantly, what happened after the departure of this Holy Prophet, the Holy Messenger from this life, from this world? After the Prophet left this world, what happened? And how was Abu Dhar treated, especially in light of what Rasulullah had said with respect to Abu Dhar? How did the people treat him? And finally, what is the main take-home message that we can take away from the life of Abu Dhar to apply into our own lives? This is our agenda for this evening. Wherever you are in Allentown or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, we began the conversation last night with respect to Salman, and there's a very strong connection between Salman and Abu Dhar. As I told you, and as I mentioned, Salman came from Faris and went through a long struggle in order to get to Islam. Abu Dhar was a bit different. Abu Dhar is one of the earliest Muslims. In fact, the narrations say that Abu Dhar is either the fourth or the fifth Muslim to come to Islam. He came very early on. Whereas there was a struggle for Salman to get to that. But there's a tradition of the Holy Prophet that is stated that will emphasize tonight. And that is, the Holy Prophet has said, and the Ahlul Bayt have said, for example, with respect to these personalities. For example, the narrations say with respect to this personality that is Salman, that Salman is on the 10th level of Iman. And Abu Dhar is on the 9th level of Iman. And Miqdad is on the 8th level of Iman. And Ammar bin Yasir is on the 7th level of Iman. This is what the narrations say. Now the question here is, if these individuals are at such a high level, what does it say about us and how we relate to them? What can we learn from their abilities and their particular aspects of their life? Furthermore, there's a second tradition that needs to be explained. And that tradition is with respect to the personality of these two individuals, that certain things Salman knew and had ma'arifah of, that even Abu Dhar may not have been aware of. Because there's this difference in terms of that. Keep that in mind as well. Now, when we come to Salman, finishing off the conversation of last night, afterwards, Salman, after the Prophet, Holy Prophet, and eventually in the Muslim world and the Muslim realms, he held certain responsibilities and certain positions. We talked about in the Battle of Khandaq, he's the one who gave the idea. And afterwards, eventually, he also became the governor of Madain. When he became the governor, he was offered the governorship of Madain. He had a conversation with Imam Ali alayhi salam, this is after Rasulullah, and Imam Ali told him, if you can benefit the people through it, do it. And so that gives us a lesson as well, that if someone can benefit on the basis of trying to alleviate the suffering of others, and they can help make the lot better of the innocent people, they should endeavor in politics. I say this because in our communities it's very vital, and I often mention this in the Jummah khutbahs, it's very important for you and I to get organized. I'll give you one example. This is not me saying that from my pocket. You know Goldman Sachs? I'm sure you've heard of Goldman Sachs. Many of you many of your kids may work there in the city in New York, for example. They estimated what is the wealth of the Hindu Indian community in America. They estimated their net worth just in America is $1.5 trillion with a T, not a B. Now, they also said that this idea is something that they are a powerhouse in America. Meaning what? When it comes to their influence in politics, in media, in finance, in academia, they have outpaced even other communities that came before them that did a lot. For example, the Jewish community. And if you find them in politics, they're extremely active. If you find them, for example, in finance, extremely active. You find them in media, extremely active in every front. In fact, some have postulated that they took the playbook of other communities who came before, but they just did it much, much faster. Why am I saying this to you and I? Where are you and I with respect to this? I'm giving credit. Credit is due to them for doing what they do. Credit where credit due in terms of the effort that they put and exerted there. I'm looking at the trajectory of our community nationally and globally. You don't live too far from New York and New Jersey. You don't live too far, and you may have friends who live in Texas. What's going on in our community globally? We're having situations where sometimes in a 5-mile radius you have five Imam Husseini. Is it not true? Doesn't this happen just in your stone's throw away from where we are? I'm not criticizing here. What I'm trying to say is, if we want to be very strong in the future of our community, we have to understand, which some other communities understood before us, that you have to feel a certain existential threat. When you feel an existential threat, that is, if you do not work together, your community will cease to exist. It forces you to work together. It's not a problem to have a few Imam Barghas and Hussainiyas. That's not the issue. The real issue is, if we're constantly reinventing the wheel, the problem of that becomes is it's a waste of resources. Resources that we could build up substantially with down the road. We're not. I remember I was in Toronto for the World Federation Exco, and there's no shortage of funding in our communities and our jamaats globally. Alhamdulillah, Allah is blessed. But the question is, do we have the consciousness to be able to understand that we work together and we not sabotage one another? This is something that these very honest conversations need to happen. The lesson of tonight, which we'll come to in a moment, but I've come to it earlier, is honesty. Abu Dhar teaches us to be very honest. And you'll see that in a moment where that comes from. When it comes to Salman, Salman took on this role in this position. What I'm saying is, we should tell our youth and our next generation to be at the forefront of finance, of academia, of politics, of media, with ethics and the akhlaq of Ahlul Bayt. No one's saying to compromise any of that. But that's how you build influence in the society to better your lot and better those lot of those beyond. Salman was in Madain. When Salman was in Madain, he was ruling over. When he was the governor of Madain, now the lesson from here, he used to get about a 5,000 dirham stipend from the Baytul Mal because he's ruling. He's the governor of the terrain. As you know, in America, for example, the president of the United States gets about $400,000 per year because they're running the country, for example. Governors have a salary. But he never used to take that salary from himself. In fact, the narrations say he would get it and he would distribute it amongst the people. So how did he make ends meet? If you remember, when he was taken as a slave, he learned how to patch and weave and create straw mats. He used to do that while he was the governor in order to pay his bills. Principle for you and I. If we want our majalis, and I want this message to go wherever, this model that we have created in our communities globally a situation that is a conflict of interest. The mimbar was a place where the truth is to be told. But if the main form of income of the people who are sitting on the mimbar is the mimbar guest coming and getting an honorarium, the problem of that is it creates a conflict of interest. If I'm sitting here, do I tell you that which you need to hear, or do I tell you that which you want to hear? If I tell you that which you need to hear, I don't come back again. And if I tell you that which, for example, you want to hear, you don't get the truth. So it's a conflict of interest. We need to seriously sit down and have sober conversations about where is the trajectory of our community. I'm saying this because, look, as many of you know, I finished my PhD last year. I'm at a situation where I'm terminal. I don't know how long terminal in terms of my career here in lecturing for Ahlul Bayt. Inshallah, Allah gives all of us a long life. But what I'm saying here is, I'm at the point in my career, it's been 12 years lecturing. And I don't see the graph of our communities in terms of the next generation looking very positive, if I'm being very honest with you. As in, we need to shift the paradigm. In where we are living, we need to make sure we meet the spiritual needs of our next generation. There are different questions that they have. There are different issues that are on their mind. I'm not saying to stop what's going on. I'm saying to really have a pulse of what's going on in our world. That's what's really vital. Coming back, Salman is serving the community. He's looking after the affairs. Another element of Salman's life, very quickly, is he had an interaction where the Muslims had gone to battle, and when they came back from battle, eventually there was an interaction with a man by the name of Zuhair bin Qayn. Zuhair bin Qayn was that individual who was on the plains of Karbala. However, when they won this battle and the Baytul Mal had come, and because of winning this battle, Zuhair was very happy. Now Zuhair, remember this principle. Zuhair in the battle of Jamal, the battle that was fought between Imam Ali alayhi salam and Aisha and Talha and Zubair on the other side, in this battle, Zuhair was on the camp of Aisha, Talha and Zubair against Imam Ali alayhi salam. Principle, somebody who's on the wrong path today may not be on the wrong path in the future. And someone who's on the wrong path today may be on the right path in the future. We have the example of Zuhair ibn Qayn, who was on the wrong path and came to the right path. We have the example of Hur, who was on the wrong path and came to the right path. We also have the examples of those who are on the right path seemingly, and they went on the wrong path. Who? Shimr bin Dil Jawshan. Shimr bin Dil Jawshan, the one who beheaded Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. Can there be anybody worse? There's Yazid and Shimr next to each other. This individual in the battle of Siffin was fighting with Imam Ali alayhi salam. That is, people, that's why you don't know where I am today. You don't know where I'll be in 10 years from now. The prayer that one should have is this, that at the end of my life, I'm on the right path. That's the most important dua. That's the most important prayer. You have examples on both sides. When this happened, this is why Zuhair is someone we should remember. The poet says, Mehve namaz ran mein Saeed o Zuhair hai. Mehve namaz ran mein Saeed o Zuhair hai. Nusrat ki is namaz mein niyat Husayn hai. This idea that Zuhair was the one who was taking arrows on his chest when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was praying. Think about this. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, half of his army is taken away during the battle. Half of his army is taken away while they're in namaz in the battle, is what I'm saying. Something for you and I to think about. Eventually, when this happens, a point for you and I to note, and for a point for you and I to notice on this, when it comes to this, he was extremely someone who remembered these lines. Zuhair did. Eventually, when he's going towards Karbala, Zuhair's army or his battalion or his group is going in parallel with Imam Hussein towards Karbala. When they're going in parallel, eventually they get to a point where Zuhair is not joining the army of Imam Hussein. But he remembers what Salman told him years ago when they won that war and they got the public treasury, and Zuhair was very happy. And Salman said to him, this gives us insight into Salman's status as well. Salman said to Zuhair, Zuhair, how happy will you be? You will be more happy on that day when you join the army of the son of Fatima al-Zahra in the plains of Karbala. He said this years ago, and Zuhair remembered that line. And eventually he joined the army of Imam al-Hussein by remembering this line in particular. And he joined at that point in time. So there's a connection between Salman and Karbala itself, whether we realize it or not. That means that Salman may have also had some insight into ilmul ghaib. That is knowledge of the unseen, either taught by Imam Ali alayhi salam or some other means, because he was able to tell him. Nonetheless, eventually there is this narration that I wanted to tell you, and that is this: that Rasulullah is attributed. So the Ahlul Bayt say there is a tradition with respect to Salman and Abu Dhar that Salman's on the 10th level, Abu Dhar is at the 9th level. But if Salman and Abu Dhar, with respect to their ma'rifah, if Abu Dhar, who's at the 9th level, if Abu Dhar knew what was in the heart and the mind of Salman, he would kill him. This is what they say. Now, this is something that needs to be clarified in terms of what the ulama say. It does not mean that Abu Dhar would have killed him. Why? Because a normal believer knows that you don't kill an innocent person. That's not acceptable. That's not right. So this is not the right interpretation. This is how they translate it. But what is the real meaning and the real purpose and the real weight and the real value behind this is, number one, Salman and Abu Dhar. If Abu Dhar knew what Salman knew, he would not be able to handle it. That is the ma'rif of it. That weight of the truth of what was in the heart of Salman, that would cause him to die perhaps. He would not be able to tolerate it. This is how much is the weight and the gap between the 9th and the 10th level of Iman, number one. And number two, the second reason what the ulama and the scholars say as to why it may be that this narration is stated is they say that Abu Dhar was extremely honest. And this honesty was such that he would not be able to keep this truth in his heart and mind, and he would say it outright, which you'll see in a moment how that was. He would say it outright, and then when he would say it outright, people would try to harm him, and they would try to beat him, or they would try to kill him, as happened in history. So this is the second element of the equation with respect to the gap between these two individuals. They had a very high status, but despite this very high status, they knew what each person's position was. That's why the poet says, "Ye to sabit ho gaya sarkar ke farman se, ye to sabit ho gaya sarkar ke farman se, jo Ali se dur hai wo dur hai iman se, jo Ali se dur hai wo dur hai iman se, aur ay Abu Zar dosti chalti rahe to theek hai, ay Abu Zar dosti chalti rahe to theek hai, pooch mat lena aqeeda Hazrat Salman se." He says, don't ask Salman or Abu Dhar. If your friendship continues with Salman, very good. But don't ask him his aqidah. Otherwise, this narration, what Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt have said, that you won't be able to tolerate it. It's a principle for you and I to understand that someone may have another level of ma'rifah. But how much can we understand and implement in our lives from the life of what is the benefit of these two? Another element of how this is explained is Salman was someone who had a spiritual dimension. In totality, he was at the highest level. But individualistically, there are certain traits that even Abu Dhar was better in. For example, I'll use a sports example. You know the sports of cricket, for example. You may know, for example, the sports of basketball. In cricket, there's a few different roles, as you know, for our elders who are familiar. There's batters, there's bowlers, there's all-rounders. Similarly, in basketball, you'll find someone who may be a shooter or a scorer, someone's a defensive player, someone who's an all-rounder. When it comes to the spiritual realm, Salman is someone who is an all-rounder. In all of the traits together, he's at the highest level when you combine them all together. But there are certain particular traits that Abu Dhar has that are even higher than Salman individualistically. For example, what? When it comes to truth and honesty, the Ahlul Bayt said that there is no one more honest than Abu Dhar. In fact, the narrations say that the Ahlul Bayt have told us that the sky has not shed, the sun has not shed its rays on someone more honest than Abu Dhar. The ground has not held the weight of anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. And the sky has not sheltered anyone more honest than Abu Dhar. Question to the Muslim world: if Rasulullah is saying that Abu Dhar is the most honest person under the sky, why in Al-Bukhari there are only 14 narrations attributed to him? And there are thousands attributed to other people who hardly spent any time. You will find out in a moment why there was this animosity against Abu Dhar. Because after Rasulullah, who did he side with? And what did history do to Abu Dhar afterwards? So principle that comes forward here is to learn. Who was Abu Dhar? Very quickly, in the next few moments that we have, what was his story? Abu Dhar was from Banu Ghafar. He's known as Abu Dhar al-Ghafari. His original name was Jundub. He was in this tribe, and they were people who were highway robbers. That's what their task. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were essentially highway bandits. So they would loot these caravans that would pass by. And number two, they were also idolaters. They were people who worshipped idols. At a young age, Abu Dhar, this never sat well with him. He was questioning. He said, it doesn't make any sense to believe in these idols, number one. And number two, it does not make any sense to rob people. It does not make sense to me. Eventually, there's a moment in time where there's a drought and a famine in that locality where his tribe is, Banu Ghafar is. At that point in time, the people began to worship to their idols. Now, as you know, there were idols at that time. Manat, Lat, Uzza, Hubal, for example. The idol that they had in particular, his tribe that was very passionate about, was Manat. And they were praying to their idol that give us rain eventually in all of these different prayers. As you know, eventually there was a belief amongst them, as well as belief amongst ancient Greeks and other civilizations, that whenever natural disasters used to happen, it was the gods that were angry. They would say, for example, there's a thunder happening or there's an earthquake, that means the gods are angry. Similarly, they had this belief that this famine and this drought was happening because the gods were angry. Eventually, while this is going on and the whole community is praying to the idol to get rain and get food, eventually Abu Dharr speaks to his friend, Jundab, his name is at the time. He says, these idols don't make any sense. Why do we worship them? He said, listen, hold on, relax. He said, these idols are useless, they're a waste of time. He said, look, hold on a second. You're gonna get me, you're gonna get yourself killed and you're gonna get me killed. He said, look, the situation is such that, allow me to paint this picture. The people of the tribe at that time are saying, hold on a second, we are not getting rain because this idol is upset at us. If they find out that Abu Dharr is someone who is speaking out against the idols, they'll say, you are the reason that gods are upset at us. We should get rid of you and kill you off, and then rain will come. This used to happen at that time. So he said, look, his friend said, look, I may believe with you, but you need to be quiet. You can't just say this right now because you're going to get yourself killed and you're going to get me killed. He said, no, I think this is true. He would keep saying this 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. One day his friend says to him, you know what you sound like? So what do you sound like? What do I sound like? I said, you sound like this one guy who's just gotten up, we've heard of, in Mecca, and he's claimed that he's a prophet. He's claimed that he's the messenger of God. There's no idols, there's no God except one, and I'm the messenger. He's saying he's the messenger. You sound like him. Abu Dharr says, this sounds like the truth to me. Eventually, when he finds this out, he flees his town and he goes back. And when he goes back, he goes towards Mecca. When he gets to Mecca, he gets by the Kaaba. He's waiting for Rasulullah. Maybe he'll see Rasulullah, but he doesn't recognize. He stays from the morning till the evening. When he gets the evening time, eventually, when the evening time comes, according to the narrations, at that point in time, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is passing by. Imam Ali alayhi salam notices that this is someone who is from out of town, someone who's not a local. When he notices this is someone from out of town, eventually he comes forward and he says, look, he says, Imam Ali says, you look like you're from out of town. Why don't you come and stay and be our guest? As you know, the custom of the Arabs even before Islam was 3 days of hospitality. 3 days they would not ask you your name or where you came from or anything. They would serve you, they would keep you as a guest. He would come and then they would stay. So Abu Dharr comes, stays the night, they feed him, they look after him. The next day he goes out, again he goes by the Kaaba waiting for Rasulullah. 1 hour passes, 2 hours pass, 3 hours pass, nothing. Again, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes, he says, why don't you come to the house? He says, yes, very well, he stays at the house. Third day, he comes again, morning to evening. Afterwards, when the third day completes, he comes to stay with Amir al-Mu'mineen. When the third day completes, eventually, he then has a conversation. Then Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says, what's the matter? What can we help you with? What can we assist you with? What's the matter here? What's the situation? Why have you come? He says, I have come here seeking out that individual who says that he is the Prophet of God, who says there is only one God, there are no idols, there is La ilaha illallah. I want to know who that person is. He says that is Muhammad the messenger. He takes him to Rasulullah. He has a conversation. Rasulullah speaks with Abu Dharr. Abu Dharr speaks with Rasulullah. Eventually his heart is at ease and he knows this is the truth. This is reality. He accepts it. He becomes a Muslim. He says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He accepts Islam. When he accepts Islam, as soon as he accepts Islam, this was the nature of Abu Dharr. He was the most honest of people. He goes towards the Kaaba. He stands right by the Kaaba and he calls out to the people. He says, oh people, now remember this is the early days of Islam. This is not the Madani period. This is the Makki period. The Meccan period is the period of difficulties, of tragedies, of struggles. He says, oh people, as you know, in the Makki period, they used to throw trash at Rasulullah and rubbish, and Rasulullah, the Muslims couldn't do anything because they were not in power, and people used to do the worst things. Anyways, he's standing by the Kaaba and he says, oh people, I want you to know the truth, and the truth is this: there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. He begins to say the kalima, the shahada in front of the people. The people of Quraysh and the people of Mecca, they all come and gang up on him and they begin to beat him. And they beat him and they beat him and they beat him and they take him to the side. Eventually the Muslims, they come and they take Abu Dharr away. They said, Abu Dharr, you don't know these people. You don't know that the animosity, the hatred that may be in their heart. You don't know that they won't leave you, they won't spare you. He said, very well. You know, some people, they just have to tell the truth. You know, some people, they just can't lie. They don't have it in them. You know, there's different types of people. I had a mentor many years ago. He came, he worked at NASA. He was an engineer at NASA, and he passed away. But he came to America in the 60s. And he said his professor used to tell him in university, in engineering school, that politics and mathematics are two different things. They're two different subjects. In mathematics, often you're looking for the truth. What is the reality of the matter? In politics, you're trying to maybe get people to your side and see your perspective. Now, if you look at it from this perspective, Abadar was not a politician. Abadar was a true blue scientist, mathematician. He was looking for the truth. He had no interest in telling you what you want to hear or anything of that nature. Now, there is some idea where you tell people in a way where they understand, but still, some people are just like Abadar. And Abadar, he comes second day, he comes to the Kaaba, and at that point in time tells people, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. They beat him again the second day. They said, again, Abadar, what are you doing? Abadar, they will kill you. He couldn't stop. He was telling the truth. At that point in time, the third day, he goes again and he says, oh people, no, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger. And eventually they come to try to beat him again. When Abbas, the uncle of Rasulullah, he says, hold on a second. This person, he's from Banu Ghifar. He has a tribe. He has a people. If they find out that you've been beating him for 2 days and are about to beat him for a third day, there will be consequences. There will be repercussions. They will come after you and they will fight you. And they will... And he said, okay, he's right. Let him go. Then eventually they let him go. This individual is someone who sacrificed tremendously and a lot for Islam. But there's a big legacy. What happened during the life of Rasulullah in the battle, or I should say the expedition of Tabuk? As you know, Tabuk was not a battle. They went on an expedition. The battle didn't ensue. There wasn't a fight that happened, but they gathered there. Now, some people were not willing to go with Rasulullah. Why? Because it was the harvest season. The crops were growing and they were about to harvest, and they said, hold on a second. We don't want to go and lose our crops and our money and fight in this war with Rasulullah. Eventually, Rasulullah's caravan sets out. When Rasulullah's caravan sets out and they're going on Tabuk, they're in the middle of the desert. Rasulullah is going. Abadar is going on his camel or his mule in the distance behind. But it's getting slower and slower. His animal cannot keep up. It would be sort of like getting out of gas, as we would say. And the people are going ahead. And they come to Rasulullah. They said, Ya Rasulullah, Abadar, he is lagging behind. He's not able to keep up. Because the people knew, they were saying that maybe Abadar is not a good person. Because the people who are honest and sincere will go with Rasulullah. Rasulullah says, if there is any good in Abadar, he will keep with us. He will come with us. Eventually, the distance grows. Rasulullah is moving forward. Abadar is going further and further behind. Eventually, the narrations say that Abadar gets off of his animal and he begins to run in the desert. And when he begins to run in the desert, eventually he gets to a point in time where he gets closer to Rasulullah in his caravan. People see someone coming in the distance. They say, who is it? They find out it's Abadar. At that point in time, Abadar, he is painting, he's out of breath. He's sweating. Rasulullah says, give him some water. And when they find him, they find that there's a mushk on his shoulder that he has is filled with water. They say, Abadar, you have water? Why haven't you drank water? He says, you're about to lose your life, it seems. He says, yes, on my way I saw a body of water. I saw an oasis, a spring of water. I filled it with water. I was about to drink, but then I thought to myself that perhaps Rasulullah is also thirsty. And I thought to myself that I cannot drink while Rasulullah is thirsty. You see, this tradition was there before. We remember Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas on the plains of Karbala. The companions of Rasulullah also had this love and admiration. At that point in time, Rasulullah gave him du'as. He drank and he joined into the army or the group and the congregation on the expedition of Tabuk. Final few things that I want to mention. What happened after Rasulullah left this world to Abadar? Now, the most honest person in this world, according to Rasulullah, that the sky has not seen someone as honest as Abadar. What happened to this person? What was this situation? The narrations say, allow me to explain. The narrations say there were certain individuals, for example, that Rasulullah in his life, he had banished them. And these people were relatives of the Umayyads, for example. And so during the time of the first Khalifa, Uthman, who would become the third Khalifa, as you know, he was the first Umayyad ruler. He was the first Umayyad ruler. He was from Banu Umayyah. Uthman comes to the first Khalifa and he says, look, my cousin was banished by Rasulullah, but now you're the Khalifa. Can you please unbanish him? Credit due to the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr. He said, no way. Rasulullah banished him. I'm not going to unbanish him. No way. Second Khalifa's time comes. Uthman comes again. My cousin was banished by Rasulullah. Do you give him the permission to come back? He says, Rasulullah banished him. I will not let him back. Second person, credit where credit is due. As soon as the third Khalifa Uthman comes into power, he brings his cousin back. As soon as Abu Dharr finds out about this, he says, what are you doing? Rasulullah banished him. What gives you the right to bring him back into town? Because he's your relative? Abu Dharr used to speak out on these things. even though people didn't like it. You know, there's a big price to pay of honesty. Have you heard of Noam Chomsky, the professor at MIT? He's considered one of the most preeminent intellectuals of our era. He's about 93 years old, and he's someone who has paid a big price for his honesty. In fact, I remember he was saying that he's the most cited professor in our world right now, alive today. And he said that when I spoke out against Vietnam in the 70s, I told my wife that you need to he was a professor. He says that you need to get ready to get a job as a waitress or something of that nature, and I will get a job as a menial doing something to make ends meet, because there will be a consequence of me speaking out. This is what true scholarship was supposed to be, even in the Islamic realm, that they say what needs to be said regardless of the consequences. This individual comes forward, and these types of people, they've paid a huge price for their honesty. In fact, even people have said that people like Noam Chomsky, they've had to pay a big price in terms of how famous they would be. He's so famous still now, but he would have been 10 times more famous if he compromised on his principles of telling the truth. Question for you and I: what do we compromise? Do we compromise our principles in order to get ahead a little bit in life? And is that worth it in the long scheme of things, in the long bend of things? It's something for you and I to reflect on. Nonetheless, Uthman, the third Khalifa, realized that this guy is becoming a big problem for me. So he banished him. He told him to leave Medina. He banished him to where? To Damascus, to Sham. When he banished him to Sham, who's ruling in Sham? The relative or the tribesman of Uthman by the name of Muawiyah. Muawiyah is ruling. At that time, Muawiyah was building a 12 million dirham mosque in his own name. Not with his money, with the people's money, with the Baytul Mal. At that point in time, Abu Dhar used to stand in front of the mosque while it was being constructed, and he would recite verses of the Quran. And he would speak out against him misappropriating the funds of the people to build this mosque in him and his family's name. At that point in time, Muawiyah wrote back and told his cousin or his relative Uthman in Medina, "Who have you sent me? What problem did you put on my neck? That this person is becoming a huge issue for me. Send him, banish him. Tell him to go away." He eventually banished this individual, Abu Dhar, to Lebanon. Many of the Shia community in Lebanon, they are from the south of Lebanon. It is much of the work of Abu Dhar to establish Shiaism and the true teaching in Lebanon, in that area at that time. He did a big service there in that time. Eventually, when he kept saying the truth, Uthman called him back to Medina and said, "Look, Abu Dhar, I want you to tell me something. What is your favorite place? What is the best place in the world to you?" He says, "The best place in the world to me is Medina, in the proximity of Rasulullah, in the woods of Rasulullah, by the neighborhood of Rasulullah." He said, "What is the worst place for you?" He says, "The worst place for me is around the place where I came from, in the middle of the barren desert where there was nothing." Uthman says, "Verily, I am banishing you to where you do not want to go. That is where you will go." And he put him on a mule, and he told people, "Do not put a saddle on that mule," to the point that his skin had become destroyed by the time he got there. And he left there, and he is buried in Rabada in modern day Saudi Arabia. The question for the Muslim world is that Rasulullah is saying there is no more honest person in the ummah than Abu Dhar. Why is Abu Dhar dying in this state in isolation? So question on the necks of the Muslim world. Because Abu Dhar was someone who was honest, because he was someone with integrity, because he was something who spoke the truth. The lesson for you and I to take away from the life of Abu Dhar is this: truth. What is our barometer? What is our level, our measure of truth? Will we say the truth when it needs to be said, or will we compromise on principles? Everyone has a different level. Everyone has a different layer. Because many of the atrocities that happen in our communities, in our societies, and I'm leaving it here, they happen because many times the silent majority does not speak out. There are people on the fringes who are moving the circles and moving the clocks and moving things to make them happen. But the people who are the majority, they remain silent and they say it is maslahah. Abu Dhar tells us there is a price to pay for the truth, but the truth is the most important thing. And the truth, as we say in our world, the truth will set you free. Do we tell the truth and do we learn from the life of Abu Dhar? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to learn from the life of Abu Dhar. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to have the courage of Abu Dhar in our lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to speak the truth, even if there may be consequences, to have the courage to be able to do so. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of all those who may be suffering in the world. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be amongst the companions of Imam Zaman and allow us to see his zuhur and hasten his zuhur. final request to please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for your marhameen, for our marhameen, for the sponsors marhameen, and for all the marhameen of those who make these programs possible by volunteering or serving before, during, and after, and especially for all those who do not have someone to recite Al-Fatiha for them. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك، علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن، عجل الله فرجه وسهل الله مخرج ودهوره، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.